There were several things that came in from the elders meeting last Sunday or Saturday, and one was that we definitely need to have a VBS this summer. So, and that's what Mark said. So I'm with you there. Let me see what my phone says. Ooh, it's 7:01. Okay, it's time. Today, hey Steve, you're going to do the little pointer thing when I get ready for it, right? There it goes. Okay. Ooh, thank you. I don't want to lose any of my notes. You know, one of the things that I have had problems with as I've gone through this series is I get ahead of my notes just because I think I remember, and I go back after class and remember and realize as I reread my notes that I forgot to say that. So those of you that are watching from afar, I think I sent the PowerPoint to everybody, and so you'll be able to follow along. So today, I discovered as I was trying to catalog all these lessons and get them in order, because of the Christmas and holiday, I mixed up my numbers. So this actually right up here says it's class number 9, but this is actually class number 8. And I know exactly what happened. So at any rate, this class we are going to be talking about, hey Jay, come on in, Sepphoris, which is a city very near Nazareth that probably Jesus would have visited. And this is a relatively recent archaeological discovery, and it is a fascinating city. And we'll look at some slides there. We'll talk about the Mount of Beatitudes, which is the traditional site where Jesus preached the Sermon on the Mount. We'll visit a church building that's been built there now. We'll visit Capernaum. We'll visit the Church of Multiplication and Nazareth. We'll visit probably the best known Jerusalem baptismal site, which was different than the one we looked at before. And then we'll visit, show some of the Sunday service during the Church of Christ meeting that we met with the last 2 times I've been there, and God willing we'll meet with next time. Jay, when you went with us last time, did we worship in Nazareth? Do you remember with the church there? Okay, good. Okay, so today we're going to spend 2 weeks, this week and next week, talking some more about the region of Galilee and some significant happenings there. So the region of Galilee, as you remember, Israel is kind of divided up by our standards into the 3 parts: Galilee, Samaria, and Judea. And so this is the region of Galilee. The city that we're going to be talking about is right down here, Sepphoris, and we're going to be talking about that a little bit later. Tiberias is largely by the way, Tiberias is right in here. Thank you. It is one of the 2 cities today that is home to the Orthodox Jewish community. So what would you think would be the other one besides Tiberias? That's kind of maybe obvious. If it's not Tiberias, not Tel Aviv, but Jerusalem is where the Orthodox Jews want to live. So it's largely an Orthodox Jewish city, and we will typically spend a couple nights in Tiberias, and that's the same thing that we're going to be doing again this year. So Sepphoris is, let me talk a little bit about Sepphoris. It was one of the New Testament, one of our New Testament stops is Sepphoris. It was a Roman city that Josephus called the ornament of Galilee. Who remembers who Josephus was? Jewish historian who actually wrote on behalf of Rome, and so we value him because he writes from a Jewish perspective. The Romans valued him because he was very smart, and so the Jews today value him or see him kind of as a traitor because he worked with the Romans, and what good Jew would work with the Romans? So it is about 3 miles from Nazareth, as you see right in here. Scholars believe it may have been the home of Mary's parents. Probably when Jesus was preaching in the Sermon on the Mount and he talked about the city set on a hill, since it was only about 3 miles from Nazareth, Jesus may have been looking over, not from Nazareth, from where he was preaching. He may have been looking over to Sepphoris and seeing it as the city that he used in his illustration. Interestingly, scholars now tell us that it was not destroyed in 70 AD like Jerusalem was, and I wouldn't expect you to know this, and I know it because I spent a little bit of time figuring it out. It was not destroyed because it was considered loyal to Rome at that time, and so the Romans didn't destroy it. However, only 4 years after Jerusalem was destroyed, a huge earthquake came through and destroyed Sepphoris. And then it basically, once the earthquake hit, it fell into non-use, and it was just recently, in relatively recent years, discovered and has been excavated. And very lightly here you can see the shadows of wagon wheels. See them right in here and right in here. They kind of had the same the same problem with Roman roads that we have with roads today. You know, you've traveled on blacktop that's been run over and over and over again by heavy-duty trucks, and they've got these little ruts. Well, the carts that they pulled did the same thing, and so you can see the ruts here and the ruts here, where the Roman carriages that went over the same Roman highway over and over again would literally dig ruts into it. Nazareth is not very far away from Sepphoris. Here we are at this view. Photo was taken of Nazareth from Sepphoris. So here we are. I'm standing in Sepphoris at this picture, looking into what is today modern-day Nazareth. And very probably, Jesus would have on numerous occasions walked between these two cities, Sepphoris, and obviously he lived in Nazareth as a child. Almost always our group will get out and we'll do some walking, and so this is one of the roads that would have been in use during Jesus' day. And so our group this is the way they did paving. It was always with stones. And there's a Roman road in Sepphoris and what is left of the ruins there that you can see. This may be a little bit better, a Roman road in Sepphoris, to see the chariot ruts. Here's one right under this gentleman's leg, and then here's another one right over here. It's a little bit hard to make them out in this picture because of the light, but I mean, they are probably, were you with us on that trip? Did we visit that when you were there, Jay? They're between a ½ inch and an inch thick, the ruts, and they're just carved right into the rock where the carriages would have gone over and over again. You saw that in another city. Okay, here's a better example of one. You can see them right in here. I got up closer, and so you could. It's staggering to me that the roads in block, not the kind of block that we do, but in brick, not in rock, would literally carve those runners in there. So we're going to next look at the Mount of Beatitudes. I try to be very, very honest and give you all of the details on which sites are thought to be absolute and which sites are to be thought to be traditional, and kind of why we think they're traditional. So the Mount of Beatitudes that we're going to look to in just a moment is the supposed site. The longest rendition of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount is given Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7. It's on the banks of the Sea of Galilee. It was located, and I'm going to show you a picture of that right in just a moment. It was located at the intersection of a major north-south and east-west highway, and so it would have been a gathering place for a lot of people. And we do know this. we do know the region that it was in, although we may not know the exact location. We know the region because Matthew chapter 4, verse 25 through chapter 5, verse 1 tells us where the crowds were coming from that were going to listen to the sermon that Jesus preached. And so great crowds followed him from Galilee and the Decapolis. We're going to show you the Decapolis in just a moment. From Jerusalem and from Judea and from beyond the Jordan. So they were coming even from the other side of the Jordan River. Seeing the crowds, he went up on the mountain, and when he sat down, his disciples came to him, and then he began preaching Matthew chapter 5 and verse 1. Okay? So we kind of have an idea of where he preached the sermon based on where the crowds that were coming from to hear him were. So here is the Decapolis, the cities that are all in red. Philadelphia, look at them. You can count them all right here. And this is where the cities were that people came to hear Jesus as he preached from the Decapolis. And you know what? I tried to fancy this slide up, but I didn't change it on this one. So this is supposed to say right here, cities where Jesus came from, or where people came from to hear the sermon that Jesus preached, okay? What else did I want to tell you? The traditional site of the Sermon on the Mount is on the northwestern side of the Sea of Galilee. So here's the northwestern side. It would have been right in here. This is the church where I'm going to show you in just a minute. The actual location is not certain, but the site that we are going to be visiting today, that I'm going to be showing you in these pictures, goes all the way back, the tradition, to about 1,600 years ago. So about 400 AD. And that's when it was first named. And the church the church that we're going to visit was an 8-sided building, or is an 8-sided building. And it was funded by the Italian dictator Mussolini. So I thought, wow, I've always heard nothing but horrible things about Mussolini, but he somehow, and the government of Italy, did fund the building of the church that I'm going to show you in just a moment here. So there you go. It was first, from the 4th century on, a Byzantine church, 8-sided if you count them. For the 8 Beatitudes, that's the reason that there were 8, because, or it's 8-sided building, because there were 8 Beatitudes built by Mussolini, and it's currently a Roman Catholic church. And you never know when you're going to get there, how many other groups are there at the same time you are. Sometimes you're fortunate enough to be the only group that's there. And again, this is another building with absolutely stunning acoustics. And usually when we get to a church building, if we're by ourselves, and sometimes even if we're not by ourselves, we will break into some chorus that other people know and just be blessed by the singing of choruses that we all know. So. Exactly. So these churches are built, destroyed, built, destroyed, built, destroyed. And so when I say it's built on the same site, that's what I'm saying. You go through the Crusades, they may have been destroyed and then rebuilt again. So that's going to happen again and again and again in these pictures, because once what is a traditional site or thought to be a site that something happens, a church is built there, but then a war or something will happen, it'll be destroyed, and then it'll be rebuilt by another group at a later time. Yeah, but that's an excellent question. Okay, so here we are. Now, okay, here is the church building, and it's up on a hill, Sermon on the Mount. I wouldn't really call it a mountain, but I'd call it a hill. And here we are now. I'm standing right along in here, taking this picture, looking the other way out to the Sea of Galilee. So we're on the northwestern coast of the Sea of Galilee. This is where the sermon was preached. On the shore of the Sea of Galilee, near Capernaum, there's the view from the church. An actual location is uncertain, and we're going to visit another possible site, and we'll tell you why the other site maybe is as good of a guess as this one is. But nonetheless, this is the one that has been celebrated for years. Probably, I don't know that you can get much of an idea, but this site right here is probably a half a mile from the Sea of Galilee. So it's on the banks of the Sea of Galilee where Jesus preached that sermon. Here's another picture of the location, this area right in here, where it would have been preached. There you go. There's the Sea of Galilee, and here's the Mediterranean Sea down here. So enough said about that. One of my favorite things about our trip, well, about every trip, I do not really serve as the guide. I serve as the tour host. And so we will have a guide who has been through a training school. And I always request that we have Christian guides. There are both Christian, Muslim, and Jewish guides. And they can all speak knowledgeably and intelligently about all the sites that we visit, whether they're Christian or not. But I have a preference, I guess for obvious reasons, of having a Christian guide because I know he really believes what he's saying. And so, as is our custom, we will typically stop at every site, at least for a few moments, and read a passage of Scripture. Different ones will volunteer, or I will call people to read. And so, here is our group. There's Catherine, Joyce Johnson, Hope Hooley. Who else do you recognize there? There were some other people that joined our group. This is a gentleman right here, a doctor, who joined our group. He was actually a Seventh-day Adventist. They didn't have enough to get their own group. He asked, our tour company at that time asked if they could join us. And of course we said yes, and so they fit right in. There were two married couples, both doctors, and they fit in very well with our group, and people of very strong faith. One of the other very interesting things, at pretty much any of these sites, there are areas for people to, groups of people to sit, but at this site, I clearly remember there was a number of groups from Europe that were speaking different languages. There was a group from India, there was a group from Japan, and there was a group from Mexico. And so Israel isn't just a country that only Americans visit, but there are always obviously great appeal to people of whatever country that are believers in Christ. And so here again is the picture of Capernaum by the sea. That's where we're going to talk about next. Located near the site that we were just talking about, near the Mount of Beatitudes. Again, there is the Capernaum. It's a shore, a city built on the shore and near the Mount of Beatitudes. Now, we have talked a lot about the Dead Sea in weeks past and its altitude, but we haven't talked much about the Sea of Galilee, and I think this is fascinating. The Sea of Galilee, in case you never knew it, is 700 feet below sea level. It's a freshwater sea. It is 13 miles from the northern tip to the southern tip, maximum of 8 miles from the east to the west. Today, it is still a city or a body of water. We would probably call it a lake and not a sea. It is a body of water that is still fished in, and tourists still love to go there. And the Israeli government continues to try to keep the Sea of Galilee full. That is to say, the Jordan River that runs into it and runs out of it is prone to be pulled off water for irrigation, but here the Israeli government continues to, even through desalination plants, supply the Sea of Galilee with fresh water. The Sea of Galilee would have, because of its low altitude, some of the same issues that lowland here in Jersey would have. And those of you who study anything about the Delaware River know that there is a creep of salt water up the Delaware River depending on what the tides are. And the same can happen in this area that the salt water can creep up. So that's an interesting little bit about the Sea of Galilee. And again, Jesus spent a good part of his life around the Sea of Galilee. Typically, one of the things that will happen at the Sea of Galilee is we'll have lunch, and if you want to go with the local cuisine, you will have St. Peter's fish. They do not serve fish like I'm used to having fish served. They serve it head and all, and you pick around the head. So we will stop, and you'll be given that as an option, the whole fish on the plate, head and all. It's the fish that St. Peter's fish is, so it's really called, is from the tilapia family of fish, and so we'll spend time there. Capernaum is the town. The name means the town of Nahum. It was in Jesus' day, and to some degree still is, a fishing village. The first century population is guesstimated to be about 1,500 people. It is on the highway between Egypt and Damascus, so once again a trade route. There, and Jay, this may go back to what you were asking earlier, remains of two ancient synagogues, one from the 1st and one from the 4th century, and also a traditional site where Peter's house was, a 5th century Byzantine church was built on top of St. Peter's house, but on top of that ancient Byzantine church is now a Catholic church on the same site. So it kind of goes back, these churches, sometimes they'll share 4 different churches, and we talked about this before, will share different parts of the same building. Other times, one church will just take over from another church, and so that's the way it is in Capernaum now. The church there is a Roman Catholic church. What else do I need to tell you about? Oh, let's talk about some Bible events. What happened at Capernaum? I think that's, as we visit there, that'll be interesting. It was Jesus' hometown. By hometown, I mean not where he grew up, but once he began his ministry. That's where he spent, that was kind of his home base, his home center. It definitely was the home of Peter, may have been the home of Matthew, the tax gatherer. Jesus healed the centurion's servant in Luke 7. That we can read about that. Jesus taught in the synagogue, and we're going to show you a picture of the synagogue here a bit later. He healed a man of unclean spirit, Luke chapter 4. He healed Peter's mother-in-law in Capernaum. He healed the paralytic. Remember the story of the men ripping off the roof, Mark chapter 2? That happened at Capernaum. And ultimately the town is cursed because of their unbelief. Even though they saw all these signs and wonders that Jesus did, they still rejected him. Here is a picture of what was the church, the Byzantine church, which was built on the site. Again, Jay goes, it was built upon the site that they think was Peter's house. And so they built a church there. The Byzantines did, 4th century. And then later, the Catholics built a church there on top of what was the Byzantine church. The inner walls are from a 1st century house. Excavations have revealed mosaics, fish, and other first fish net weights, not fish, but fish net weights, what they would use to hold down which is one of the reasons they think it might have been Peter's house, and other 1st century artifacts. So when they did the excavation, that's one of the ways that they date a site, is what things that we know were there from a certain era do we find at this level. The outer wall is a 4th century synagogue, and then the structure at the top is now a modern day Catholic church. And so you may say, well, what does that Catholic church look like today? There it is today. So what I just showed you, if I can get up here and maybe point my pointer up, is all built under this Catholic church. So all those ruins that we were looking at earlier are down under the ground here. And here's a Catholic church that was built on top of the Byzantine church. So, if you have a sacred site, you're going to build something to commemorate it. And then over here, the line of people was a group that wanted to go in and visit church. And so we avoid lines whenever we can. And one of the huge advantages of traveling with tour groups is your tour guide will move you into the front of the line and kind of bypasses all the other people, and all your admissions are paid and all that when you travel with a tour group, which is what we are. And here is a tour boat that we will, pretty much every trip that I have taken out the last 3 or 4 trips anyway, will include a trip on the Sea of Galilee, a boat ride on the Sea of Galilee. Frequently we'll just shut off the engine right in the middle of the Sea of Galilee and pray, or sing some choruses that we all know, or read a scripture that is lifted from Jesus calming the storm, or walking on the water, just something to remind us of what happened on this body of water. And there is but one Sea of Galilee, so we know that that's where Jesus did the things that we read about there. The Church of the Multiplication, once again, in this region of Galilee, the story found in Mark chapter 6, verses 32 through 44, located close to Capernaum, right on the sea. Once again, an early Byzantine church from about 380 AD was constructed there, and then it was enlarged in 480. So maybe, Jay, going back to that original question, then it was destroyed by the Persians, and then the site was acquired by the German Catholics in 1888. They began rebuilding, in 1939, and was completed in 1982. So every one of these religious sites kind of has a history of one church after another after another. This is built upon the site where Jesus supposedly did the miracle of feeding the 5,000 with the 5 loaves and 2 fish. Once again, on the northwestern coast of the Sea of Galilee. I guess that's enough. Also, the Church of Multiplication would have landscaping, very beautifully landscaped. You see the 2 fish there, commemorating that miracle of the 5 loaves and 2 fish. Again, Jim and Carol Bailey were with us on this trip, and so Jim took a lot of pictures, and this I borrowed from him. There's Carol. And then again, you see one of the fish right down in here. Just beautiful gardens. Time to be still, time to be with the group, time to, if you're as a couple, get off as a couple by yourself. Built right at that site, mosaics into the floor, again, the 2 fish, boom and boov, and a basket that carried the 5 loaves, depicting that biblical scene. And we've talked a lot about mosaics before, but that was just a very special way to commemorate biblical events. They would build mosaics into the floor, or even sometimes onto the walls. Next, we're going to visit Nazareth. We're going to visit a site thought to be where Gabriel announced to Mary that she was going to give birth. That's called now the Church of the Annunciation, Luke chapter 1. It's also Mary, Joseph leave Egypt for Nazareth. That ends up being, after they left to flee from Herod the Great, they left Egypt for Nazareth. You can read that back in Matthew 2, Jesus' childhood home, Luke 4, and Jesus reading from the synagogue scroll, and we will read from that synagogue scroll, or at least from a story. We won't read from the scroll, but we will read from that during our time there. So those are all events that happened in Nazareth. So here's Nazareth, right up here along the kind of halfway equidistance between the Mediterranean Sea and the Sea of Galilee. And yeah, here's the one I cleaned up. I knew I cleaned up one of those sides. The Decapolis, right here. Here we go. Are these cities in red? Damascus, Dion, Pella, Garcia, Philadelphia, and there were 10 cities that the Romans built that were called the Decapolis. And they were proud of their cities. The Romans were known for their building of cities. By the way, let me go back. Which one was that? Biblical events. Yeah, I wanted to say a little bit more about that. Nazareth is the largest city in the northern district of Israel today. Nazareth is known as the Arab capital of Israel. The population in Nazareth today, this is the way it is today, is predominantly an Arab citizens, almost all of whom are Muslim. So over 70% of individuals living in Nazareth today are Muslim, and only 30% are Christian. And this is the city that my parents served as missionaries in the mid-1970s, and that was the reason we first led a group. And basically our little group of 7 or 8 or 10 people, I've even forgotten how large it was no larger than 10. They were all friends of my parents who wanted to go see my parents, and so we took them, and that's the way I started leading tours to Israel. So we're back to Decapolis now, the cities that are highlighted in red, all Roman cities. This is a picture of the Church of the Annunciation. It is one of the least decorated churches. For reasons that I don't fully understand, it is now a Greek Orthodox church, a very unimpressive entryway right here. This is the door that we would come in right here. Snap this picture when there were not many people there. It was built during the reign of Emperor Constantine, at least for the first time. Very likely it was initiated by Constantine's mother, who was an early believer. She was a great church builder, Constantine's mother, in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. And the church was built here, guess why? Because there is supposedly a holy site there. And what is that holy site? Well, according to tradition, this is where the Gabriel announced to Mary that she was with child, and she traditionally received that announcement from Gabriel while she was drawing water. And again, that is tradition. But I do know this, there is a well inside of here, and it's called Mary's Well, and it may very well be the well where Mary drew water, and if not, it may be the well where Jesus later would have been sent by Mary, because it's a very, very, very old well, and so those who like will be given opportunity to drink water out of Mary's well. There's a little ladle, and you can bring your own. That's all in Nazareth. Again, a Greek Orthodox church. One of the very special things that we did last time we were there, I don't think it was even in operation at the time, Jay, that you may have gone with us, was there is a restored Nazareth village that is a reproduction made to look like and furnished with equipment and furnished with supplies that could have been in use during the time that Jesus would have been a boy. And so this is a carpenter's bench, thought to be like one that Joseph and Jesus would have used in a typical carpenter shop. This is it right here. And so they have a whole little village. Oh, it may take up 2 acres, and we will have an opportunity to walk through that. In addition to the carpenter's shop and tools there, here's the carpenter reproduction, obviously a modern Arab guy, and this woman here showed us how to weave, and she was a weaver of wool. And this piece that's right over here by her left hand, you can't see it, but she had demonstrated to us how wool would have been woven during the times of Jesus. I mentioned earlier that there is a synagogue built upon the site that scholars believe that the synagogue would have been built during Jesus' day. And so it's a reconstructed synagogue. The original site is claimed to have been a 1st century synagogue where Jesus attended. That's the thought. That's the tradition. The 12th century, the Crusaders built a church adjacent to the synagogue, And the scrolls that we are seeing here are very much like the scrolls that Jesus would have had to read from when he entered there. And you can see here there are 3 rows. They are like just carved into the side. And that's probably where the worshipers would have sat. They didn't have seats. They didn't have chairs like we do. They would have sat in this carved out area. So we do know this. We do know that it was in Nazareth that Jesus did interrupt what was happening, and he read from this passage, Luke chapter 4, 16 through 21. Luke says, he came to Nazareth where he had been brought up, and as it was his custom, he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day, and the picture that we showed you just a moment ago is supposedly built on the same synagogue site, though it's not the same synagogue. He stood up to read, and the scroll that he read from was very prophetic. A scroll of Isaiah was given to him. He unrolled the scroll and found the place that this is written, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has appointed me to proclaim the good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, and to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. And he rolled up the scroll, and he gave it back to the attendant and sat down. And the eyes of all in the synagogue were fixed on him. And he began to say to them, today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing. Whoa. Jesus claiming at that instant to be the one that Isaiah had been talking about. Jesus claiming to be the prophet that was going to proclaim the year of the Lord. And that's when he started getting in big trouble. Because they didn't like him claiming to be the Lord's Messiah. And that's when the jealousy, I think, really began, and the rejection by the religious leaders really began to be manifest, because he had the gall to stand up and read this scripture. And then to say, today this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing. Woo. Yeah. Okay. So, that's the synagogue at Nazareth. And it's another place that it just kind of puts shivers in along my spine, and gives me goosebumps. Also Galilee, I mentioned before that there were 2 primary sites where baptisms today by pilgrims are performed. The one that I showed you last time is down by the Dead Sea, and it is not as commercialized as this one is. This is one up farther near the Sea of Galilee. And I said this one, the other one, this one here, when I was with you last week, I said the other site is much more commercialized. Now I'm going to show you what the commercialized site looks like, okay? So it's got a big welcome to the baptismal site on the Jordan River, very nicely decorated with stone. You see some people, you see the handrails here. People can come down in here. Again, very picturesque. This was not our group, but large groups come, and there will be many people that are baptized, and there's 2 different areas that you can have baptisms from. And very honestly, this one here is, well, I have been there, and our group may make a short visit here. Anyone that would want to be baptized, we could do that here, but we'll probably go to the other site, Bethany beyond the Jordan, because I really believe the other site was probably closer to where Jesus was baptized. And but either place, and you will, whether you want to be baptized or not. And if you've been baptized, no need to do that again, obviously, but you will at the very least be given a chance to, both here and at a couple other sites, to dip your feet in the Jordan River. And there's Jim and Carol Bailey again, dipping feet in the Jordan River. Here I am reading from Acts 2, before these 2 ladies here were baptized. Had not known them before they came, but they joined our group and had made their decision that they wanted to be baptized. And so I said, well, look, before you're baptized, let's read about when the church was started, Acts chapter 2, and we baptized both of them. You'll see pictures of this here just in a moment. And if you want to bring your own clothes, you can bring your own clothes. And if you want, I think these are, I don't know, they're not expensive. $5 or $3, and you can get a baptismal robe. They have a little changing area and all that. So anyway, here's one of those being baptized and coming back up. This sister here is now passed on. She and her daughter joined us. The daughter is still alive, but she's already passed on. So again, still at the baptismal site, there's a store, and if you want to get a bottle of water out of the Jordan River, you can do that. And there's other souvenirs that you can buy there for whatever it's worth. Then from the baptismal site on this particular tour, then we went to Nazareth. And Nazareth is the location where my parents lived. Nazareth, there is a Church of Christ there. And we will worship at that Church of Christ the Sunday that we are in Israel. Here's a picture of what it looks like today from the outside. It's not a really good picture because it was a lot of shadows there, and they've made some improvement on it since then. Inside the church, the songs are in Arabic, and typically we will sing Arabic songs and English songs. Sometimes we'll sing together. Melody, did you go to Israel with us? Yes, and we worshiped with the church there. Okay, good, yeah. Here's a part of our group that was there that day, and Melody, you're not in that picture there because this was another trip, yeah. And on that Sunday, I was able to preach, and here's Maurice. He was translating for us, and again, the service will be bilingual, which means you'll get a shorter sermon, but it'll last the same amount of time. One of the elders of the church there has two elders. One of the elders will probably greet us and thank us for coming. And, well, just let me say a little bit more about that. The church there probably has 40 to 50 people, maybe 30 to 40, when there are no tourists there, and there are pretty often tourists there. And a lot of the people are poorer. And so they have asked us, look, we know when you travel with your tour group, we know you're going to do lunch somewhere. So we would love to have you after church stay around, and we'll do kind of a fellowship meal with us. And we'll give you a good deal on the meal, and so we get to make some extra money for the church, and you get to get a meal done by local Arabic women. And so we did that last year, and we will probably do that again this year. Pardon? It was excellent meal. Yes, it was an excellent meal. It was. So anyway, and last year was the first time we did that, but I definitely will plan to do that again because it's a real wonderful time. We'll usually not all sit just all the group together in the church together, but we'll mix and mingle. And rather coincidentally, my primary instructor, advisor at Harding Grad, Dr. Everett Hufford was there. He was going to lead another tour group. As it turned out, his group, because it was the week that the American Embassy moved from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, his group did not make, but Dr. Hufford went along, and so we got to have kind of a family or not a family reunion, but a reunion, and it was great to be with him. So anyway, next week we're going to talk more about Galilee. So next week is Galilee Part 2. We'll talk about Caesarea, and there we'll talk about there's two Caesareas, a Caesarea Philippi and a Caesarea by the sea. We'll talk about those two. We'll talk a little bit more about the Palestinian territory, and we'll talk a little bit more about Bethlehem. So that's where we're going next time, and hope to see you then. I just got a couple more calls. Oh boy, somebody had trying to. Steve, we did stream, right? Okay, well, somebody was having trouble getting on. Pardon me? Okay, good. All righty, so thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. And boy, for once, I'm actually done 5 minutes earlier than I'm supposed to be. Any questions? Jay, you want to add anything? Melody, you want to add anything? You've both been there before. Kind of putting you on the spot, I know. So.
I'm not so sure I was at that particular Nazareth church because I thought the seats were all spacing inward toward the center.
Yeah, you know what, Jay? When you came, when you were with us that time, we worshiped with a Messianic church in Jerusalem, I think. Is that sound? It was in Hebrew? Oh, okay. The question was, Jay asked, okay, I don't think that was the same church building that we went to when I was with your group, and I think he's right. I think we worshiped with a church, a Messianic church in Jerusalem. And this is the church in Nazareth. There are two churches of Christ there in Israel today. And one is in Nazareth and one is, and it's it's an Arabic church. And then the other one is actually led by a Jewish man, and they do their whole service in Hebrew. And so I think they translated for us when we were there too. So anyway, all righty. Well, thank you all for your presence, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week. Same place, same time. Thank you. We're dismissed. Okay. Oh, you...